Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony University, and today we're speaking with Monsignor Frank Marriott. He's retired and living in Bendigo as he has much of his life. Thanks for coming in, Monsignor.
Delighted to be here, Norman. Delighted.
Now, I'm going to make an obvious comment here. You would have been born a Catholic.
I was.
What
yes.
happened then? How did you get to where you are?
How did I get to where I was? Well, went to a Catholic school in Bendigo for several years, to the convent school, then to the Marriott brothers. Mum and Dad were small business people, had cafes, milk bars, bakeries. They moved out to Elmore because it was considered a healthier option for my sister who had asthma.
Oh, right.
Then moved on, of all places, to East Camberwell and then to Maryborough. That was their business life. So we journeyed with them. On the way, I went to school, grade 5 and 6 in Elmore, off to Assumption College. You've probably heard about it, producing many good footballers.
Yes.
Failed miserably on that score, although I played cricket. Then in my last year at Assumption College, 1955, so that'll give people an idea of how ancient I am. Like many lads at the time, young people were making choices about life. And I remember quite distinctly we had a retreat on the 12th, 13th, 14th of August that year. And on the last day I made a decision, I'd give it a go.
Oh, really?
By that I mean it had been in my mind, priesthood, And at Kilmore in those days there was nothing unusual for 4 or 5 men to go away in any one year, either to the brothers or to the religious or to the diocesan priesthood. In those days, Werribee was the seminary.
Yes.
Went down there one day and saw this glorious place, the old Churnside Mansion. I thought that's October, grass is green, blah, blah, blah. And I found myself in Adelaide in February, and there's more grass on the floor of this studio today than there was then in February. I remember we got off the train at Central Station in Adelaide, and 2 things. 9 o'clock in the morning, the Overlander. In those days, the train was even air-conditioned in 1956, biggest trip I'd ever had in a train. It was 34 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was hot. And then the other thing is the suburban train turned up. It was an old puffing billy with a big round water bag hanging off the edge at the back. So if you need to drink, you went out. And I just started to wonder where were they? The Redskins, you used to say in the Tom Mix will arrive or hop along at any moment.
That's right.
So it was a pretty rude change. The whole image of the 2 places.
Yes.
One looked luscious and green and cared for, and the other was barren, and off we started. So that was 50. Back to Bendigo in 62 for ordination in the cathedral where I was baptised.
Right.
And then first permanent appointment, Cobram, in 1963 on the river.
Okay.
So I started out, if you like, the pastoral experience of the last 55 years.
And it's been all country related though, hasn't it?
Basically country related, yes. I've never had any great desire to be a missionary to the world. I thought there was enough work to be done at home.
Yes.
I've travelled a fair bit, thankfully, over the years, and that's been useful to me. I have a very good friend, Arch and Joyce Young. Arch has died in the last year or 2. And I remember him coming to me in, let's say, 1971 and said something, look, if you're really going to be a leader in your community, you need to know what's going on in the world. So he fundamentally shouted me a trip, and I paid expenses to the Philippines, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Then I shot into Vietnam in 1972 to see what was going on there. Right. Thailand, and I had a contact there with the the Thailand Rural Reconstruction.
Right.
And that was through one of those movement for a better world things in Australia at that time. Then back to Malaysia, where I met the extended Chinese family, Kuching, up to the longhouses, all that sort of stuff in those early days, back into Singapore and home. And then the head was going round for months after it. I'd never experienced anything quite like it, and that probably got a bug for travel out of that. Well, haven't been home much since, many would say.
It sounds as though it's a good way to get a bug. How did you find that influenced or affected in any way your Catholic priesthood? Did you find that there was a growth there?
One of the things that happened along the way, I had previously been highly involved in the old YCW NCGM movement, the Young Christian Workers.
Yeah.
And I ended up as diocesan chaplain in the 70s, full time. And that was the first time anyone had had that role in the diocese. And they were getting difficult years, post-Vietnam and all that sort of stuff then.
Yeah.
But I met some wonderful YCW chaplains in many of those places.
Oh, right, yep.
And that then led later on to going back to the Philippines to do a youth workers course experience. And we had about 35 men from all over Asia, many of whom worked in the YCW in different countries, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Tanzania, Ceylon, and others were chaplains to schools. And what you discovered then, that in a sense, the chaplains to the school were on about religious education. The chaplains in the YCW were on about formation of the human being.
Ah, right. Yeah.
Huge distinction.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I'd come up through that, and I've remained firmly committed to that ever since. I think if you don't, particularly in youth work, but even in adult work, if you can't get people together to look at their lives in the light of the gospel and to act upon it, the man who founded the YCW was a famous Belgian priest called Joseph Cardine, and he was the first to put into our language in our times the famous See Judge Act.
Right.
And you can find it in different parts, and various other people have alluded to it, but he actually made it concrete, and he kept asking all people involved in that youth movement to try and practice the See, Judge and Act.
Well, we've just slipped out of time, so we'll come back to that See, Judge, Act after. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Monsignor Frank Marriott, retired.
Still.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I guess it's a fairly permanent position. We were talking about the See Judge Act process. Describe what that's about.
Well, the concept is that you've got to get something to come from here to here to here.
Okay, right.
That you can have all the great thoughts in the world, you can have all the magnificent statements, put it in our context to love one another. And you can talk about it and nothing happens.
That's right.
But I'll tell you just one little story that's still very vivid.
Yeah.
And Ted won't mind me using his name, which I've already done. But Ted was a clerk in the railways in Bendigo. He sadly had a few physical difficulties that made walking at times hard, but he was a terrific bloke, really. And he'd come to the meeting regularly. He was made treasurer, and he's very efficient at doing that and all that. He still, in a sense, as we say in the modern world, he hadn't quite got it.
No.
And we'd talk about how you might get it. You know, you could help this one, you could do that, and do something else. And And Ted would take it in and go off. He came in this night to the meeting. I still remember I drove from Beechworth in those days to the key leaders meeting in Bendigo every couple of weeks. 300 Ks, mad and young, Wellsworth. And he came and he said, I did it. What do you mean you did it? I helped a lady cross the road to the fountain the other day. He'd been seeing the situation of these people. At the back of his mind, he'd made the judgment, I should do something, but he'd never done it.
Never acted, right.
See, judge, act, do with and do again. So there were these little, but the whole nature of that work led to many wonderful people gaining positions of competence in their own community and a deep love of the faith that they'd been baptised into and acted accordingly. And even today, the man who's just been elected as Secretary General of the United Nations had his basic formation in the YCW in Portugal 45, 50 years ago.
Oh, that is significant. Yes.
So there's all sorts of people even in Australia that have topped up with Greg Crafter in Adelaide, became a very successful minister of the Crown over there, and I'm just trying to think of his name at the moment, it's grey hair and old age, who in Victoria was a minister, and he's written a whole series of lectures and books on some of this, what I'm trying to say in a very quick time. So it had a major effect upon me, and that meeting in Manila in 1974-75, where there was quite a heated debate about the formation versus education, and that's a bit blunt. But it helped me because I came back as parish priest of Heathcote, and in the late 70s, the Victorian government made a decision to dump all the intractable liquid waste from Melbourne into the forest at Dargall, just outside Heathcote. The local community heard about it eventually, and a couple of the key figures of the community, including in those days Leonard French, the artist. He came to me one day and said, you've got to get the community together on this. And I didn't know too much about intractable liquid waste and all that, but
that's right.
I started to do some homework and all right. So at that stage, there was an Anglican minister and a Methodist minister. I decided that they should be the three key people on the committee to bring those three communities together. And when we had meeting after meeting, and I used the Seed Judge Act
in that
whole process. Except I used to call, what's the gossip going around the town? Well, it was remarkable what Joe had heard from Bill, and Bill had been in Leongatha and was talking to the woodcutter up in the back of Woods Point, and all these things going on in the formal community about what was going to happen in the Dargall forest. And you got the people thinking about that. And at a funeral last Monday, Mr. and Mrs. Wright, who weren't members of our community, introduced me to a few people by saying, this is the man who brought us together and saved Heathcote. Now, I don't quite accept, but there's a book written about it all, if you want to call it, Heathcote, the Dargall dump episode. And the big thing about it all is not only did we save Heathcote, and they got the bribes anyhow, a better hospital, sewerage, and sports pavilion that had been promised on the way through. And emoluments, I suppose you'd say. But the best thing really about that whole experience was that the community came together and within 12 months the scientists or whoever they were in Melbourne had discovered a way to recycle 95% of all that liquid waste.
What they were going to get rid of.
And they were getting paid because they got all these metals out of the liquid waste that they could then use and sell.
Yeah.
Taught me a big lesson that. And also the background of Manila, I knew that the day I stood up in the pulpit and sort of said, I'm into this, that was going to cause division in the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because about 6 of the 9 councillors were Catholics and they were all sitting in front of me on Sunday. It's been an interesting experience.
Yeah, yeah, an influential one.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. That's now you've mentioned. I've looked at your background. There's quite a lot of vicar generals and monsignors and stuff. Perhaps we'll go to break. If you would perhaps describe what those roles actually are.
Okay, I'll happily try to do that.
Good. Thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Monsignor Frank Marriott. And I addressed earlier the fact that you've held quite a few distinguished positions, and I just wondered if we could start by you defining what's the difference between a parish priest and a Monsignor. What's the
title only?
Is it?
The average parish priest is his title would be Father or Reverend Father or something of that nature. The Monsignor, by definition, is an honorific title given to some priests because of the positions I've held. So, for example, normally the Vicar General, who's the 2IC in the diocese, would have the title of Monsignor. In our world today, there's a bit of a reaction against bestowing that title upon people who are too young. The popes actually won't grant that title to people unless they've spent 30 or 40 years in the church, because he thinks too many people are being ambitious to become a Monsignor. I was rung up by the bishop one day and told to come to the chancery, so I was going through me, what sins have I committed this week? And I got in there to be told 3 priests of the diocese had been made Monsignors, and I was one of them. So it's an honorific title that it's probably a throwdown from the old days. The technical, for myself, I've also got a word after it called, how about this, a prothonotary apostolic.
Wow. Right, okay. Well, you're not going to ask me to spell that, so that's good.
But it's, in the old days, there were 3 grades of Monsignors, the PA at the top, the red Monsignor and the black. And the black was always the Vicar General, the red was when you wore a bit of a red satan, and the prothonotary apostolic was considered the high grade. And it dates back to the days when the notary was the person who did all the stuff, and he was pretty important around the papal court. I haven't been invited to the papal court yet, so that's... No. So it's really a title of honour.
Yes.
And the bishop alone makes that decision, and he applies to the Pope, and if the Pope agrees, the paperwork is put in. It entitles you to more work.
Yeah, well, that's good.
On the way, I obviously was the curate in the parish, or the assistant priest, sometimes called. I mentioned the fact that I was the diocesan chaplain to the youth movement full-time for a couple of years, parish priest. Parishes are organised in deaneries, so I held the office of dean for a number of years. I've chaired various committees in the church, the diocesan council of priests. I was the chair of that for a number of years at different times. I held the position of chair of the professional standards committee for the diocese for quite a number of years as well.
Okay.
Then, out of the blue, I was asked to go to the cathedral, and at the cathedral I was the administrator of the cathedral, because in our system the bishop is really the parish priest of the cathedral. Right. So you act on behalf of the bishop.
The bishop, yeah.
And that was a bit an honour that I never anticipated, but came my way. And during that time, the very beloved Bishop Joe Grech He was the bishop at the time, and he got that sudden illness just 7 days before Christmas, and was dead a few days after it.
Yeah.
And I was elected administrator of the diocese at that time.
Right.
So I held that position for 15 months, and in one sense was the acting bishop, and that was another experience. So
Yeah.
lots of little things in some ways I've come across, and various other committees, but fundamentally in the church you're the assistant priest and you're a parish priest. A number of people are asked to look after the people in a certain deanery because of the distances. Melbourne has deaneries as well, and all the time. It's a formal position, dean, and then elected onto various committees in the diocese. And I ended up being asked to be spiritual counsellor to the Teams movement, which is another movement for married couples in the church. Very strong in Melbourne and in Sandhurst and through Australia.
Okay.
Something like 150,000 people involved worldwide in 70 or 80 countries.
Okay.
And the role of the spiritual counsellor from day one in that movement was to accompany the couples as they explored what marriage and found ways of building a better marriage and trying to put into place a system whereby couples who are eager and anxious about their marriage to develop it further would be able to do so.
Yeah.
It's one thing, again, we're back to ICW in a sense, lecturing people from the pulpit about good marriages.
Yes.
But how do you do it?
How do you do it? Yeah.
And the guy who started at Caffarel, the French priest, he insisted from the beginning, he didn't really start it. Young couples came to him very soon after their marriage, just before the big war in 39, and said, we want to develop our marriage, will you help us?
Yeah.
And these leads said, why come to me? I'm not married, I don't know anything about Oh, you know a lot of things. Well, he said, I'll walk with you,
Yes.
I'll accompany you, but it's your show.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's been a great experience for me because I ended up spiritual counsellor for the Oceania region, just finished as a couple of weeks ago, and you meet some wonderful people.
Yeah.
And of course the newspapers don't report upon the wonderful marriages we have, but
No, that's right.
that's
There's no
how it
news
goes.
in
But
it.
they're
No.
there, I can assure you.
So this whole issue of spiritual counselling, how does that relate over into, as a priest, you would have practiced spiritual counselling in that context, wouldn't you?
Yeah. The Teams movement didn't like the term chaplain because often chaplain meant you were leading, and they developed this word spiritual counsellor. We Aussies don't like it very much because it seems to indicate something that we don't, as the spiritual counsellor, you don't do. So you haven't got your shingle out saying I'm a spiritual counsellor. You're there to offer insights.
Right. And I have an insight, Father. We have to finish because we're out of time, but so I need to invite you to come back next week because we've got lots of stuff and we'll continue on with this conversation about spiritual counselling.
Well,
so would you be able to do that?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Norman.
much. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. Next week we'll be speaking again with Monsignor Frank Marriott. Thanks for watching and bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om.